screen as I'm talking through this. So today, rhetoric in academic writing. The first thing that I wanted to share is just concerning the rhetorical context, or is also called the rhetorical situation. This is content from that very first chapter you were assigned to read, which is the right section, number 1. But as I mentioned last week, all of the opening chapters of the book, I think they're really helpful. So please feel free to read any of them that you like. But from that very first W1 chapter, you'll see that you have this presentation of rhetoric. So what do we mean by rhetoric? Well, the word rhetoric has several different definitions, kind of depending on the context. But right now, we're talking about rhetoric as the effective use of language in order to persuade, or just in order to get a message effectively across to a particular audience in a particular situation. So it means being able to use strategies in order to convey and clearly communicate your message and to achieve the purpose that you have set for whatever you're writing or whatever your speech is about, if you're doing a speech or something like that. So rhetorical context, the context or the situation, we mean the unique combination of, these kinds of elements, like who's the audience? What's your purpose? What is the topic that you're trying to talk about? What's your stance on this topic? What kind of genre is your speech supposed to be, or your writing supposed to be? The topic and the media form that you're going to use to convey your message. So these combine and become the situation that you're in, the rhetorical situation or the rhetorical context. Really important to become aware of the rhetorical context, because the more you're aware of the situation that you're in, the expectations that are there, and how that audience could respond to you, the more effective you're going to be in creating success for yourself in conveying your message. So we're always adjusting and thinking about, what am I trying to accomplish here? Who am I writing this for, or who am I speaking to? What do they care about? This is similar to what I talked about in week 1, but things radically adjust depending on that context that you're in. And in order to be really strong in rhetoric, it means that you need to build awareness of these elements that you're in that situation, and how you can adjust and use different strategies to approach different situations. One of the ways to do this, or to start doing this really, is to practice identifying and analyzing the rhetoric that's used by others, especially the rhetoric that's used by really successful people in the use of language. So one of the things we're going to start doing with our first paper and our exercise for this week is to start that process of really identifying and kind of seeing how other people are able to use rhetoric really effectively. And what do we appreciate about that? Or what do we think about that as we analyze that? Okay, so the W2 section was also assigned for this week, and it talks about the academic context. Now, we mentioned genre. In other words, one way to think about genre is that academic writing can be considered its own type of genre in writing, really. So there are different expectations when you write academically or for college classes and that sort of thing in the professional world. So what I have up here comes directly from the text. And again, because some of you are waiting on access to the book for a little bit of extra time for shipping, just wanted to mark some of these down to just be thinking about these. And we're going to continue to work on and see these represented throughout the class. But when you're writing for a college class, there are certain expectations, and they tend to be radically different from the way that we write and talk out there just in general, especially when we think about writing and talking casually or through social media and stuff like that. This is a different level. It is going to be its own kind of writing. We call it academic writing. So for this kind of writing, you need to have these kinds of key elements happening in your work in order to have a lot of respect out there, and in order to, of course, score really well on the writing that you submit for classes. So some of these elements are things like demonstrating that you've carefully considered the subject. the expectation is that if you're going to write academically about something, you've really carefully thought about it, you've organized your thoughts, you have maybe done some research even into that topic, and you know some things about that. So you have carefully considered and thought through the topic before you decide you want to write about it out there in college courses and things like that. You need to have a thesis. The book is really great about talking about ways you can qualify your thesis, which means that you're adding a couple of words or limits on your statements sometimes in order to make them more realistic or more appropriate to what you really want to claim. But your thesis is a fancy word for your main point in your writing. The thesis is your main point. So in academic writing, the thesis is often your answer to the prompt that you were given. So if you're asked to write, hey, what do you think about blank? Your thesis is your main answer to that question. So the thesis is your main idea. Okay, contextualization, what I mean by that is that you are setting your work up as a response to things that people have already been talking about out there. You don't want to pretend as though you're the only one who's ever written about this topic, because part of demonstrating that you know something about it is that you're representing the work of other people along the way and how your view fits in with what everybody is saying. Is your view, say, for example, part of the majority opinion out there, or do you have a minority opinion out there? Is your view more of an extreme, or do you have a more conservative view on this topic? So you're going to kind of set your particular stance on this topic up in the context of what other people have already been saying. Now, this I didn't see this in the chapter for today in W2, but we also talk about this as the academic conversation. So pretending as though there is this academic conversation that's been going on about this topic, whatever the topic is, people have been talking about it. They've been debating on it. They've been, presenting their findings from research on it and their scholarship, and they've been having this conversation through publishing about this topic. So what would you add to that conversation? How would your view fit in that conversation about the topic? Okay, academic writing also requires reasons and evidence for your position. So whereas, you can post online and just and give, or even something like a blog post and share your view or your personal story or something like that. In this case, in academic writing, you're going to be asked to provide reasons for your position, solid logical reasons that you can support with evidence. The evidence can come from a variety of places. We'll talk about that kind of as we go, but really the strongest papers tend to have a variety of evidence from different sources and different types of evidence. So also acknowledgement of other views and respect, or showing respect for multiple viewpoints, is part of what goes on to academic writing, and it gains you more respect out there. So this doesn't mean that you're agreeing with multiple points of view. You couldn't agree with everybody. So the idea is that you're recognizing that there are multiple viewpoints out there, and that there are valid points out there from different positions, even though you might still hold your own position, right? So you're acknowledging multiple viewpoints in a way that's respectful of other views. So documenting sources, we're going to be using MLA style this semester. MLA means Modern Language Association. This is something that English tends to prefer as a style. And what I mean by style is just the way that you give credit to your sources and the way you format your paper. Things like that go into what's called styles. So APA is another style out there. It's famous. You may have used it for other classes because other disciplines prefer different types of styles. And there's, Chicago style. There's a lot of different ones. We're going to use MLA this semester, but in academic writing, you must document where you got your source material. So it's part of giving credit to other people and the work that they've already done. It's also part of proving that your source came from a trustworthy place, and that way it's providing strong support for you. You want to take a confident stance in academic writing. So you wouldn't write a paper where you really show that you're really not sure about something. So that goes back to adjusting your thesis or adjusting your claim for what you really are sure that you want to claim. We'll talk about that as we go, but you're going to be confident. This means you usually don't need to include words like I think or I believe or in my opinion when you're writing academically. It kind of goes without saying that if it's your paper, then it is your view. So you can go past that, delete those words from your sentences for the most part, and just make your claim. And then, of course, you're going to represent the significance of your topic. Why is your topic important? You know, how does it impact or matter to not just, you know, our individual lives, but also things like the development of that topic of study, the community at large or society at large, you know, and whatever applies to that particular topic. So does it have significance for the environment, for example, for businesses? Why is this topic important? That's going to be part of what you write about when you write academically, is that you'll show you understand why your topic is important. Okay, so all of those are key elements for academic writing. I really like the discussion of that in your textbook. So please make sure that you read W2 on the academic context side, and just know that the academic writing style is one style. It happens to be the main style that we are training in this semester. However, it's not the only style that we're going to train in. And I just want you to know that it's there because it is supposed to support intellectual study and giving credit to the work of other people in this world of scholarship that you're a part of as a college student. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is the only right way to write, okay? So it's just that these are the expectations that are set up, and you would have a different set of expectations if you were writing in a different situation, not for a college class, but for some other reason. There are always going to be expectations or standards, and you're just going to want to know what they are before you try to send something or publish something in that area, and make sure that you're meeting those expectations so that your view is respected. Okay, so W5 was also assigned as the largest section that you had to read for this particular week. Again, if you're waiting on the book, make sure you read W5 as well, because it does give you sample paragraphs, which I think are really important to kind of see some examples along the way. And that's one of the reasons that I really wanted us to have the book. So paragraphs are some of the building blocks of what we're going to write, and basically paragraphs should be entire units in and of themselves, which means that they're going to have their own beginning, middle, and end, and they are able to have their own main point. So a lot of times, you know, in writing, we may have disorganized papers because we forget that our paragraph can only have one major point. There's got to be a reason that all of these sentences go together in a paragraph. So that's something to keep in mind. There can only be one main point for each of the paragraphs, and the main point is often presented as a sentence in the paragraph. So your book talks about how you have options. You want that topic sentence to go at the beginning to say the main point of the paragraph, or at the end. It can go wherever you like. Some paragraphs don't have a topic sentence at all, but all paragraphs have a main point. So this point is then going to be supported in a different way, in different various ways, through details, through examples. The book goes through some of the options that you have in the way you want to talk about your main point. So, and you're going to choose whichever option best supports that point that you're trying to make. So like if my point is that Houston is a much more lively, entertaining city than Chicago, for example, just making this up, not necessarily true. I've only been to Chicago one time, so I can't really say. But if I wanted to say that, okay, Houston is much more lively and entertaining than Chicago. That's my topic sentence. That's my main point. Well, then I have to figure out, how do I want to support that? How can I develop that? If I look at these options, there's one option that clearly helps me with that, right? The compare and contrast option on the screen here. I'm not necessarily going to want to go into causes or effects or classify something. I might want to describe something about the city. That might be something I want to do. I might want to tell a short story or narrate. But I think the number one thing that I'm going to try to do in that paragraph is to compare and contrast, because then I can show the similarities and differences between Chicago and Houston in terms of their entertainment, right? And that's going to help me to prove my point. So these are options. You pick the one that you think best helps you support the main point that you want to make. And by the way, these are also called modes. So you may hear people call these modes of composition, but they are different methods that we use in order to write about something. So oftentimes writers have trouble figuring out how they can produce the middle part of the paragraph. How do I lengthen this section? How do I have more to say? Well, it's about having detail, having examples, and then thinking through it in different ways, like what's up here on the screen. Now, you oftentimes will pick only one of these for each paragraph that you're doing or set of paragraphs that you're doing. But when you get more advanced and you're writing longer pieces, you might want to mix these up and do a combination of these different modes. Okay, so paragraphs. If you can write strong paragraphs, you are well on the way to writing strong essays, of course, because essays are going to strategically combine paragraphs together in a certain set, in a certain order, to create one final essay piece, right? With an introduction, body paragraphs, and conclusion. Okay, so I'm going to transition now and leave the textbook and opening chapters for the week and start talking about some things ahead of week 3, which is introducing this rhetorical situation or rhetorical context a little bit more and setting us up for a practice activity that we're going to do this week. All right, so on the screen here, you can see this is from ThoughtCo. This is a really cool demonstration of how that rhetorical context or situation may play out. So a very famous example of the I Have a Dream speech from Martin Luther King Jr. You do have in here, and I think you can see my mouse here, but you'll have that this speech had a purpose, a demand to racial equality. Okay, the speech had a speaker or the author of the speech. That would be, Martin Luther King Jr. The speech had a particular audience that was given when it was given live. And so that audience is gathered together for a purpose. And we can think about a lot of elements of the audience and what they are concerned about, what their emotions would be like, their background knowledge on this topic, and all the things that I talked about last week. You also have the setting or location of the speech as part of that situation that you're in. And then, of course, the text itself, meaning the message that you want to get across in the words or language that you're going to use in order to do that. So all of these elements combine, and because of the combination of these elements, they create a unique situation. In order to be the most effective with rhetoric, you must be aware of the situation that you're in and adjust accordingly in order to achieve your purpose or goal for the speech. All right, so when we talk about rhetoric, there's a lot to talk about. There are many different elements or strategies behind how you can use language effectively. So there are elements like parallelism, repetition, figurative language. And we will go into some of that as we go forward, but we're going to start with the core of this, some of the most important things that are talked about. And what I mean by that is that we're going to talk about the 3 appeals: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos, pathos, and logos have been around since the time of Aristotle. So they have been around forever, and they basically represent 3 major ways that we try to persuade other people. So they're all involved in rhetoric and using language effectively. And what you're going to see is that people use them all the time, continue to use them as part of our ways to persuade. You've already been using them all along the way, whether you had been calling them ethos, pathos, logos or not. But I'm just showing on the screen some basic opening definitions of these 3. And these 3 combined constitute part of what's called the rhetorical triangle, which is a combination of the speaker, the audience, and the message, using these appeals, ethos, pathos, logos, to try to persuade. So when we talk about ethos, we mean that we're trying to be persuasive because we're showing that we are trustworthy or credible. So the speaker or writer is trustworthy, credible, they have a strong character, and this is very persuasive. So for example, if you were getting medical advice and a doctor is giving you the medical advice, you're going to be thinking, okay, this is a doctor, right? They're a medical professional. So they should be trustworthy, hopefully, in that field, especially in combination with other doctors who are coming from places that we know and trust in there. So that is part of their ethos or trustworthiness. And we're going to be more likely to agree with their medical advice versus a friend that we have who say is, is not a doctor, right? But is just has heard something and is telling us about what they've heard. That person may be a trustworthy person, but they're not as trustworthy for that topic as a doctor, right? So ethos is going to be the speaker or writer's credibility and character. Ethos also comes into play when we use famous people or celebrities to endorse a product, for example, because we know them, we have some kind of association with them already, and they're usually going to be endorsing something that they have some kind of connection with. Pathos is the part of rhetoric where you're appealing to emotion. So pathos is appealing to the heart of the audience and inspiring an emotion in the audience to try to get them to be persuaded. So that emotion is whatever emotion is really going to be strategically the best for that particular purpose. So like, for example, if I want my audience to want to buy a Jeep, then I want to create emotions in them that's going to get them really excited, for example, excited about the independence of being able to drive a Jeep over a mountain or something. By the way, not recommending that you drive over a mountain, so just disclaimer there. But I'm going to want someone to be excited about owning a Jeep. So excitement is going to be part of the pathos that I use. And I'm going to use things like music, color, situation, my word choice in order to make the audience feel excited, if that's the emotion I want them to feel. Now, I might want them to feel angry for something else, or afraid for something else, or hopeful for something else. So the emotion that you want to inspire, it's very connected to your goal and what kind of goal you have for that particular speech or advertisement or whatever you're giving. Okay, so pathos is emotion. Logos is going to be using logical reasons and evidence. All right, so there are some people who tend to be more convinced by reasoning intellectually versus in numbers, facts, and statistics, for example, instead of emotion, like we just talked about with pathos. And most people are some kind of a combination, right? So using logos means that you are giving logical reasons and you are giving evidence to support something. So like, for example, if I want someone to buy a toothbrush, then I may say, hey, this toothbrush cleans 79% more plaque than the Crest toothbrush over here. And by the way, I'm not saying anything about Crest necessarily. I'm just talking about that as an example of a use of evidence. So I made that number up. It's completely made that up. But using logos means using facts, statistics, and information, logical reasons in order to support your position. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing screen here because I want to show you something else, which is just a little bit more detail into what I just talked about here. Let me share my screen again to show you this. Okay, so you should be seeing the rhetorical triangle, which is that combination we talked about of the three appeals. And it just gives a little bit more. This is from Visual Communication Guy, which I thought was fun, but it gives a really cool background as to why these have these particular names. So ethos is the Greek term for ethics, but it represents credibility of the person or the speaker. So is this person trustworthy or not? Do they have experience or reputation that makes them trustworthy about this? Ethos is established through status, awareness, professionalism, celebrity endorsements, research. So ethos is going to persuade people just because you happen to think you can trust that person on that particular topic. By the way, when you are trying to persuade someone, and you want to use rhetoric, it means that you are going to want to establish that you are trustworthy on this particular topic yourself. So you're going to show, hey, I've done some research in this area, right? I have spent a lot of time and effort on what I'm telling you right now with the work that I'm giving you. Okay, so pathos again is the emotional appeal for the audience, how they feel when they experience your message. And you can use any of these emotions that you think are the most useful for you to get your point across. Logos has to do with logic, and again is facts, research, other message elements that provide the proof or evidence for the claim. Use logos to convince the audience that what they're hearing or seeing is well researched, well built, or otherwise worth their time. You know, we hear a lot of phrases like do your own research or I did my own research. And the logos element here is really supposed to represent solid, credible information and evidence that has been gathered to support the main point. So this is going to be compelling evidence here, a logical reasoning to back your position. Okay, so I just want to show you an example of identifying ethos, pathos, and logos. And it's just kind of a fun, quick example. And then I'm going to lead up to what we're doing for week 2 assignments. So let me share my screen again here and show you just this one example in an advertisement. All right. Okay, so you should be seeing an advertisement here on the screen, and oops, hang on, I was trying to make it larger and I need to reshare it. I'm sorry, it clicked out of it, so I need to reshare it really quick. Hang on. Okay. All right, so looking at this advertisement right here, it's from Pedigree. It is a, Pedigree is a pet food company, and specifically dogs. So if I'm looking at this advertisement and I want to think, how are they using ethos, pathos, and logos? I'm going to kind of break it down and look for signs of each of those 3 appeals that are happening. So ethos means credibility or trustworthiness for this particular topic. Well, just so happens that Pedigree is a very well trusted brand name. So you'll see that in the advertisement, Pedigree's name brand is bright. It's easy to see down here on the screen because they're already well known and respected. So the ethos part of this is already established by their reputation as a brand. So this is why if you see advertisements from very famous brands, they're going to have their name, really large on the advertisement or something like that. Are very easy to spot because they have that strong ethos already represented through the work that they've done or the products that they've made in the past. Okay, so if I look at pathos here, I see a dog, right? When we think, who is the audience for this? Well, dog owners, right? What do dog owners like to see? Dogs. Okay. By the way, I happen to be a cat owner myself, so I should just probably share that at the moment. However, I know a lot of dog people, and this particular dog, people are going to want to see that, right? It takes up a lot of the advertisement space here, and it's part of creating that emotional attachment to this particular product. So notice too, without oral care, I could get gum disease or worse, dog breath. That's also an example of pathos because it's an example of humor, a little bit of light humor, where it is also coupled with really important information or part of the purpose or message. Now, the text below that is a little bit harder to read on the screen because it's small, so I'm just going to read it out loud. It says, "This is Max. Max was adopted thanks in part to Pedigree Feeding Project, our initiative to feed more shelter dogs. To find out more about Feeding Project and how the calcium and phosphorus in our food helps keeps Max's teeth and gums nice and clean, visit facebook.com/pedigree." Okay, so that text under there is really a combination of ethos and logos, right? The ethos part is that they are doing charitable work out there with the Feeding Project to feed shelter dogs. This is something that goes into things that we value, respect. It goes into building the character of the company or their reputation. A lot of companies right now are highlighting charitable work that they are interested in, or in being environmentally conscientious, and all those things that we are caring about right now. So that's part of that ethos. But then you had some logos mixed in. because you have calcium and phosphorus. This is illogical information that shows some of the ingredients and demonstrates that the ingredients are there to promote dental health for dogs, right? So this particular advertisement is a combination of ethos, pathos, and logos all wrapped into one. The three appeals, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. The three appeals are used all the time in speeches, advertisements, any time that someone wants to convey a message to somebody else, and especially when they want to persuade, they will want to use some kind of combination of ethos, pathos, and logos to do it. Now, a lot of times these things are happening in tandem, and you're going to have a representation of something being both pathos and ethos at the same time. For example, they're not always separated out, and they won't happen, the three of them won't happen all the time, every time. So I just wanted to say that as a disclaimer. Even though we're identifying where we see them, just so you know, they run together, they're used together. The same piece of information can function as both pathos and logos, for example.